Speaker recognizes the honourable member for Gander.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm going to try and not be too controversial and stick to the UK style of maiden speeches. It seems very much that the place for me to start is with thanks. It may turn into a little bit of an autobiographical romp later on, but I think no one, as my colleagues have said, gets here by themselves. And we can talk about how that process started, but certainly the campaign of last week in the news made me kind of revisit my own campaign, although it was nowhere near as nasty or as harsh. In actual fact, we had so much fun with the nomination, we did it a second time, and we're with an even more spectacular win. So to list off all the people who were involved in our success in Gander would be invidious. And I think rather than try, I'd use a shorthand, and I'll use, for the campaign team, Randall Mercer, who was my manager and put in long hours, as did everyone else of what was a small but mighty team. And I think that reflects the level of support I had in the community. I think a shorthand for friends and family, I would have to give credit to my partner and mentor in many respects, and fashion consultant, Jeanette. She is the shorthand for, again, a small but really enthusiastic group of friends and family. Modest in size group, but again, we all get here via different routes, and I think to try and list off a long list of names would only embarrass me by leaving somebody out, and I'd feel bad about that. So I came here via a different route. As you might notice from the accent, this is a really old Newfoundland accent. I grew up in an extended blended family in a very urban area in Manchester. Population 750,000, so it's not exactly a small town. It might come as no surprise for people who regard me as maybe controversial and a bit provocative to know that my maternal grandmother was brought home more than once by the local constabulary in the 20s for wielding signs, and actually I think she hit a constable over the head with it, which said, "Give women the vote." And she got the vote. She got it first in her 30s because she was a married woman, married to someone with property. And that was gradually rectified over the time. So she was the politician in the household, and we'd get into it on a Sunday over the lunch, and that would cause agitation with everybody else. My father passed away when I was young, and I was raised by my mum and her younger brother, who's a historian and is the last surviving member of the clan, and that's why I often start spouting history, much to the sort of eye-rolling of my colleagues behind sometimes, but I find it useful, and I'll blame him. I was a local recruit to medical school. In those days, you could direct entry from high school. The idea was that you would be recruited locally. They had this big new medical school, and you would stay there and practice locally. It kind of sounds familiar. It's a theme that keeps cropping up. But in actual fact, it worked, because I stayed in that area in general in Manchester for 10 years, thereabouts. Apprenticeship was more of the word for surgical training in the UK at the time. It didn't have any defined end. And at some point, it was felt appropriate that I should actually go into full-time research for a couple of years. And I did that. And in actual fact, that's the MD degree that you see behind my name. It's a medical PhD. It's not a registrable. The basic qualification in the UK is slightly different.
You'll get there one day.
I'll get there. Anyway, what happened after that was it was suggested that I try academic surgery as a career. So I moved to Liverpool. And it was a disaster, quite frankly. I learned an awful lot about politics within the department of an academic surgical unit, who to talk to about what and who not to talk to, or at least not let on that you'd spoken to about things. It was awful. So that was the final straw that made me look elsewhere. And funnily enough, in the 80s, I had been in conversation with a fella from a place called Carbonear, which I'd never heard of at the time. And for one reason or another, connected with family, I decided not to set foot there. So anyway, nothing personal. I mean, it's a lovely spot.
What a fantastic recruiter.
That's right, yes. So anyway, some years later, I answered an ad for a group called the Grenfell Regional Health Services.
Yeah, good people. Good people.
And after a visit, one January, actually, to look around the place, and a couple of snowmobile rides, which I thought were really great. Never been on one of those before. The rest, as they say, is history, and I arrived in Snantney just about the time, or just after the time, the cod left, and I don't know whether the two were connected in other people's minds, but anyway, lovely place, but the nearest girls' dress shop was 6.5 hours drive away, and with 3 daughters, that wasn't going to cut it for any great length of time. I had a blast, though. I actually went and did clinics up in Labrador. I go to Nain. I wasn't allowed off the plane in Davis Inlet for all sorts of reasons I never really understood, but I think that was down to Grenfell and the RCMP and the band at the time. There were some disagreements there, which I never really understood. And then Hopedale was my other favourite place, and amongst other experiences, I remember taking a medical student from London, England, caribou hunting with Jimmy, the maintenance man from Hopedale. She never got over that, and I never saw her again after that. Punching a caribou on the ice was something that was quite outside what she had expected to see. She wasn't particularly good in the OR either, so I think the surgery probably wasn't her forte. But anyway, a chance. No, I put her on the plane. We shipped her back out to the UK, and
Do not tell your knitting needle story.
No, I won't tell the knitting needle story. So anyway, a chance vacancy ended up with me going on to the board of the Medical Association in the province. Part of it was because I couldn't understand how the system worked, so I kept on asking questions, and then I realized nobody else knew how it worked either. But I did think somewhere there would be a room, a committee, where the answer would appear. I haven't found it yet, but that started the quest. So I got involved with the system in the province and learnt a lot. Then that kind of led on to the national level, the Canadian Medical Association, and that I really enjoyed. But the catch is, from a political point of view, it was very much a non-partisan affair, and I came out of the Liberal closet only after I was off the executive of the CMA to avoid any disconcerting revelations for them. But it did get me used to the role of advocacy and communications and the use of the media. And I went back to work thinking, surely something is different than when I left 2 years ago. And really the final straw there was that things hadn't changed. And between the jigs and the reels and a fellow called Scott Sims, that was how I ended up going the provincial route. And really have absolutely no regrets about it at all. Whether or not people on the other side share the same view or will share the same view, and whether my district will in 4 years, 3 and a bit years' time, I don't know. But I'm trying to do this from the point of view of what actually was 11 months ago to the date when I was sworn in as a cabinet minister, an opportunity, again, once in a lifetime. So I'm trying hard not to fool it up. In terms of the district, I represent a kind of different district. It's rural, but it's actually a very compact district. It's not many rural MHAs who can drive from one end of their district to another in just over an hour, and really only has 5 communities. But it represents a whole diversity of traditional industries. We have logging and guiding and hunting, all the way up to aviation and some really new, non-traditional, exciting opportunities. I mean, one of the things that I really revel in at the moment is learning about the new things I get exposed to. I mean, I retired from surgery, hung up my knife, much to my colleagues' delight, because I keep telling him stories about when I hadn't hung it up, and he doesn't like that, he gets nervous. But, you know, Gander was founded on aviation, but the things I've learned about birch sap in the last couple of weeks are absolutely astounding. There's a $9 billion global market out there on birch sap. And the last great stand of birch trees on the island in the center is smack in my district. You know, really exciting stuff. So you talk about opportunities that I would never have known about. There is one of them for sure. Craft brewing, another subject close to my heart, is on the horizon there. There's a family physician's husband who is a pilot and is a brew hobbyist who's looking to start that. And again, I don't know an awful lot about the brewing industry. What's really interesting from my point of view is one of my constituents actually wants to grow grapes and we'll have some red wine. I know there is a berry wine in Twillingate, but the idea of, you know, grape-based produce really appeals to me personally. So I'm looking forward to getting intimately involved in the helping forward with that. Yeah, I'll do the quality control. That's right. So I really, for me, moving from one career to another has been a real interest. It's been exciting. It's a challenge. I was a person whose previous career, I could have told you exactly what time of the day it was and what day of the week it was by what I was doing. It was that regular and that organized and regimented. And I now go and come in the office in the morning, and when the house is not sitting, I really don't have any idea with any certainty of where I'm going to end up in a couple of hours' time. The parade of people who come through, who I get a chance to see both in my district office and through the department, are a fascinating crew. And I realized, looking back, that one of the things you do, even as a surgeon, and some of my family physician colleagues would take exception to the idea that surgeons actually talk to people, but you know, you do develop an affinity and an enjoyment for that, and certainly it's given me a chance to put that set of skills into a completely different perspective. I mean, I suppose in a sense I'm the ultimate come from away. I was one of the 25% of international medical graduates who actually stayed beyond the 2 years, which is fairly typical. And really, I have to say that where I live and work now has never made me feel come from away. I don't think anyone's ever mentioned that to me. It rolls into one other thing which I think has been highlighted recently, and I don't know how many of you, I know the member for St. John's Centre, let me get that right, actually had the opportunity to attend the Come From Away performance in Gander at the arena there. They did 2 performances. It was an interesting genesis as to how this musical came about, but it started out life as a project for a performing arts college up along, and they have really run with it. It's been a raging success on the stage, and what they did was they adapted this to what they call a concert venue. So instead of having the scenery and all the rest of it, they had the band at the back, and they had the 12 performers lined up with their microphones, and a quick change of clothes, a cap or a jacket, just to highlight a change. And it was incredible. There were other people here who were there and enjoyed it. And it was a marvelous event. I think it wasn't just about Gander, though. It was actually about the whole province. I think the mayors of the communities that actually were mentioned in it, and some of whom were caricatured in the performance very well, I might add, were very keen to point out that they were just examples of, not the only ones who did. That goes, in actual fact, I think it opens tomorrow night in Toronto. And then in February, there will be a run-up to a Broadway launch sometime in March. And I've certainly been very keen in my discussions with colleagues from tourism that once that hits the screen, people actually have come to me and said, we didn't believe Gander existed. We didn't believe that there were people like this. It was a real eye-opener. My sole contribution to 9/11 was along with an obstetrician and gynecologist, was actually making a chili. And that was probably the single biggest health hazard that most of them had in their entire 5-day stay in Glenwood at the time. But the story of the chili came out from NAV Canada in the end, because they made more chili for more people, and it was Gander, not Glenwood, but we won't go there. Again, I am very proud of the district I serve. I have regrets that I can't spend as much time sometime as I would like to there. And certainly it's always a challenge when the House is sitting. But again, like my predecessors at the microphones, I think it's really important that I state here now that they are the reason I am here. The other titles that I have, courtesy of the Premier, are an honor and a privilege too. But I am here in this House only because I was elected to do a particular job, and that's to represent the people of central Newfoundland, and specifically the district of Gander, not just the town of Gander. And to the people who elected me, thank you very much. I'm not going to prolong the agony this afternoon. I think you've heard enough of me now, and I'm reaching the limits of what I can say and not be controversial or provocative. So the best thing to do now is probably for me to thank again the people of the district in Gander and my family and supporters, and assure you that I will continue to work hard for as long as you put me here. Thank you.